Bible has had with God, and we looked at this morning in class, Moses coming face to face with God and what that encounter, that experience looked like. And today we're going to look at Isaiah and see his encounter that he had with God, and then take a little different twist for this afternoon by looking at Peter. But before we start that, I want to just share with you some of the experiences that I had here in Greenwood, growing up here, that has, I believe, molded me today of who I am, which is not much, but it has nothing to do with what I learned here, but I'm kidding. There are a lot of things that I've experienced here that I am thankful for that has helped me with my family. And let me share some of these with you. I was real hesitant doing this because I know I'm going to leave some people out, and I don't mean to do that, so I apologize. But some of the things that I experienced. Number one is farming. I learned that I don't want to farm. And the Makinsons invited me at my 9th grade year, in between my 8th and 9th grade year, to come out there and to farm about 6,000 acres. And Mr. Gary just worked me and Stephen to death. And at the end of that, I'm like, I've got to do something that involves inside. This is not me. Another thing that comes to mind, Mims Farm. And if you don't know what that means scary barn. It doesn't matter how old you are. If you're 2 or if you're 20, they're going to scare the mess out of you. And you got to the Mims Farm and you got to do that, but that helped me. We had a thing in Amory called Scarefest. And I put in a lot of effort for Scarefest, and that is to scare everybody that wanted to dare come through our deal. And I always had in the back of my mind, Mims Farm, it's got to be as good as that. We would have anywhere from 100 to 150 teenagers come, anywhere from Tennessee to just surrounding area would come to our Scarefest that we did for about 10 years. Leela, you would have loved it. That's some of the things that I experienced. Going out to the Barrett's farm. I won't tell you one thing that I saw, but one thing that I did share with them that you understand there's snapshots of things that you remember. And that is taking a trampoline, putting it out in a pond, half in, half out, and jumping on the trampoline with the twins and just diving into the lake. Guess what we did in our youth group? The very thing. We got to find a trampoline and a pond. And when you do that, then you have a great youth group. Also understand when you experience some things, you go to the Singleton's house. And with Marcus, one thing that I remember is we would go behind their house, and we used to climb what we used to think at the time were mountains. But they weren't. They were Carroll County hills. And but we would climb them, and there was one time, where I literally faced death. We got up to almost to the top, and I looked at Mark and said, man, I can't reach. I'm just hanging by a limb on the side of what I thought was considered a cliff. And he's like, just let go, you'll just slide down. And I said, I'm scared. Until I had decided to take someone's painting here at the church. And I won't mention who it was. And I took his painting, and I ran down this, and kids, don't do this. I ran down this hall right here. I open that door, this person's chasing me. I go up here, dive into the baptistry, come out to the other side, and run out this side door, and I was gone. I knew that if he caught me, that was the end of my life. And so I kept going with his painting wet in my hand. That was bad. Don't do that. But I understood, though, in ministry, teenagers and kids do really stupid things. And so you learn in ministry that you always need that family. You always need that lady. You always need that Cindy to help run that youth program when I interned here. And you need an individual that can just do all this work in order for it to happen. You also need people like the Moats, who when they were in Senatobia, opened up their home in our college group. And a beautiful lady came up to me and says, hello, my name is Leslie. I don't remember that. I really don't. She said, we met then. I did not realize that. But that's where we met for our first time. And it was because of the Moats and them opening their home in order to do that. But when you look at molding me into be a minister, other than my dad, who is the greatest influence in my life, it has to go all the way back to Brother Pig. For me, now for some of you it may not be. And for him, it was that clean cut. Now for some of you, the older ones, y'all have a different memory of that clean cut. I mean, as far as but for him it was clean cut. He always dressed nice. And then James Draper. I've never met anybody like him. And I said in class, I don't know if it was because of his notes and how rainbow his notes were and his, little sweat rag that he carried around, to him teaching me how to drive, to him teaching me how to shoot a basketball, but for the time and study that he put into God's Word. Or Mr. Doug, who decided that when there was a time for a minister, that he's going to take time out of his life, out of his work, to be the minister here and to learn a language, which I will not do. Not because I won't, I can't imagine that task of trying to learn another language. But that meant a lot to me. To Alex Bays. Let me tell you what Alex, one of the first things when I interned here, this is what he did. I said, man, Alex, teach me something. He said, all right, here you go. Now preach that. I'm like, here, for I will speak noble things, and from my lips will come what is right. Yes, that's what you need to do. Be able to preach like that. I'm like, are you crazy? What are you talking about? And he's like, you need to be able to take a passage and just preach that passage. Now, nobody will ever have the energy with Alex. Am I right? Nobody has that. He is still just like that. But one thing he taught me was whenever you take God's Word, take a passage and learn how to draw the picture out from that so other people can see God's Word. And so I would like to say thank you to the elders and to the members here for letting me to come back home to speak to you. And thank you again for the wonderful and the great influence that each one of you had in my life. And I am doing my best over on northeast side of Mississippi. They're in Amory, but also now in Aberdeen. Isaiah chapter 6. And I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple, and above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew, and one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts, and the whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the threshold shook as the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, for I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. And then one of the seraphims flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with the tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth and said, Behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. There was a lady that went to an ice cream shop, Haagen-Dazs is what it was. And she gets there, and she is placing her order for this ice cream, and she is really looking forward to it. Until somebody behind her says, Hello. She turned around, and she noticed there was Paul Newman. Now, some of you may not, some of you may not. May know, some of you may not know, but it doesn't matter. Celebrity. And for her, it is like, for me, meeting Michael Jordan. And so right there behind her is Paul Newman, and he says, hello, and she turns around, and the article describes her as just losing it. Her knees begin to shake, her heart goes down to her stomach, and this was her reaction. She takes her money, throws it to the cash register, she turns around and she leaves. So she goes to the bench, she sits down, she's trying to catch her breath, trying to figure out what in the world. I can't believe he said hello with those beautiful blue eyes. Oh my word, I threw the lady my money, and he comes out. He says, "Ma'am, did you forget your ice cream?" Now, this is Paul Newman that came out. "Did you forget your ice cream?" And again, she's in awestruck. She said, "Oh, no, sir. I put the ice cream in my purse." And he said, "Well, no, ma'am. Here's your ice cream. Here it is." And she did that. Have you ever been in awe of someone? Somebody comes into the room and you're just like, and you give them the wrong name or something like that. You know, I wonder when we get so excited about meeting a celebrity, how do we enter into worship, into the presence of God? You know, when you think about Ezekiel chapter 1, it says that he fell on his face in the presence of God. Daniel says he loses all of his strength. I can't do anything. John says he fell to his face as dead when he came into the presence of God. When you came in here to worship, did any of those three things happen? Did you lose any weakness at all? Did we fall to our face when we entered into this worship? Did it feel like that we were dead because of who we are approaching? Throughout biblical history, just a handful of people had the opportunity to see the throne of God and had very difficulty, I believe, in trying to do this and draw a picture of this throne room of worship, except for Isaiah. I think he did a pretty good job at showing us this. And his encounter with God was during a very, very personal tragedy and a time of loss for the children of Israel. They just lost their king, a king that brought to them great prosperity, great wealth. This king has now died. And now Isaiah is wondering, what is this nation going to be like? Is this going to be a nation that's going to be ruled by a king who can bring this economic stability back to us? Are we going to be blessed with a king who's going to rule this nation with God leading it? Is there going to be great civil war between our nations? And Isaiah is just, what are we going to do? And so he goes into the temple, and this is whenever he comes face to face with God. In a very tragic time, he goes into the temple and God says, "I'm going to give you a peek." And is that not comforting that whenever we're dealing with any type of tragedy, whether that is in the home, whether that is at school, whether that is in our worship, whatever it is, that you can come face to face with God so that He can help you in whatever situation and time that is needed. Maybe there is some confusion or certainty. Maybe your job is unstable. Maybe you have kids that are rebellious. Maybe it's just some poor choices in life. Wouldn't it be great in times of bad news and painful experiences that you could experience God face to face? There was a little girl drawing a picture in Sunday school, and a teacher comes up to her and says, "Man, what are you drawing?" And she goes, "I'm drawing God." He said, "Well, you don't know what God looks like." Her comment's like, "Well, just wait till I get done, and you'll know exactly what God looks like." And, we may not be able to physically see the presence of God, whatever that is. But in Matthew 18:20, it says, "Where two or three are gathered in your midst, I'll be there." And in Psalms 22 and verse 3, he says that He inhabits the praise of His people. So I want us this morning to look at what Isaiah saw. When Isaiah encountered God face to face, what is it that he saw? And I think the first one that comes to mind is he was overwhelmed by the presence of God. He was overwhelmed by what he experienced. He goes into the throne room of God, he sees it, and you have God whose train, his robe has filled the whole temple. It's so large that it fills the entire room. He's so high and so holy and almighty that even the angelic beings dare to look at him. You have two that's covering the eyes, two covering the feet. You have two circling around the seraphims that are singing. Their only purpose is to sing, holy, holy, holy. Some theologians believe that the cherubims, that their main purpose is to bring people from one place into the throne room of God. And you have the seraphims that came around and just flew around God singing, holy, holy, holy. Isaiah is seeing this. He is seeing angelic beings not even being able to look at God. He is seeing that they are covering their feet because it is out of pure respect in where they are walking and who they are with. And then it begins to talk about how this whole room is filled with smoke. And it begins to shake. It's beginning to shake of the praise that is being offered, that worship, that singing. And it's just shaking like a LA earthquake, I guess you can say. Just, and Isaiah is getting a glimpse, a look of the presence of God. So I need to ask you this morning, when is the last time that we stood in awe of God? When is the last time when you look at your life and it literally shook the core of your life because you've been in the presence of God? Why is it that sometimes people are not awestruck? J.B. Phillips called this the sin of reductionism. What that means is, it just means that they have somehow placed God and made him into whatever size box that you want it to be in. And whenever we can move God and change God in our minds to fit into a box, then really God doesn't look what? He doesn't really look that big, does he? And so whenever we come and people come and view God, or they hear God, or people speak about God and they come into worship, well, if God is nothing more than like a good old boy or a man upstairs, or, hey, whatever, he's like a brother or something like that, then he's really not any different than the person that you're sitting next to. And so what happens is whether that is through how fast-paced this world is, or how much sometimes people love certain things, that we're able to take God and be able to say, we're going to put you into this little box, and this is what you look like. Isaiah didn't see God in a box. He saw him sitting on a throne, and even the angelic beings were in awe of him. We need to just really remember that the Lord is more powerful and more holy than our ability to even describe him. John does his best to describe him, but we must never approach with such awesomeness in a routine or ho-hum manner. When you think about what God made, if you were to take this mic, and the end of that mic is the sun. The largest star, if you believe in this stuff, the largest star is what's called the Canis Majoris. And if that is the sun size, Canis Majoris would be the size of this room. Now, I want you to think about that. Now, I believe the sun is pretty big. At least it appears to. I believe the earth is big. And when you look at the sun, it's really big. And then if there's something that is this much bigger than the sun, and God literally just spoke it into existence? Or just look at what God created here. I've got 3 boys. I did pray for my third one to be a girl. I did. I prayed hard. And people are like, well, why didn't you pray for health? Well, I did. I wanted to be healthy, but I wanted a girl. God said if I wanted something, ask for it, and I did. Well, if you look, he has blonde hair and blue eyes. No clue. No clue. I can see God. I think he's a comedian a little bit. All right, you want a girl? Well, here you go. I'll give you a boy. But he's going to have blonde hair. You don't have that. And blue eyes, and you don't have that. But it's beautiful. Just sitting there and looking at people, it's beautiful. And he says it's very, very good. And if a God can make everything that we see in the stars and just looking at you, look at you, then when we come into the temple or we come into the worship of God, wow. We are in the presence of God, not someone who can fit into a box or anything like that. Looking at someone who is a lot bigger than I am. And I have gained weight since I left here. The other thing that we see with Isaiah is that not only is he overwhelmed by being in the presence of God, he is overwhelmed by his own sin. You know, you can sense the fear of Isaiah's response because perhaps for the first time in his life, he saw himself in stark contrast to pure in holiness. And what he saw wasn't pretty. I mean, imagine for a minute. Isaiah is now getting to see what he looks like by looking at pure in holiness. Now, sometimes what I like to do is take what I look like and then compare it to somebody else. And then what happens? Man, I look good. Coach also, Bruce also, every single day at practice, he said this. I mean, we knew it, and we just let him have fun with it. Coming to the locker room, Stephen and I would come in, and he's looking himself in the mirror. What are you looking at, Coach? What is it? He's like, I can't wait till tomorrow. Why, Coach? Because I get better looking every day. So he said, and guess what I do all the time now? I look in the mirror. Boys, I can't wait till tomorrow. Why, Dad? Because I get better looking every day. And you know, we do get better looking every day, especially when we compare ourselves to somebody else. And when you look at it in the sense of our iniquities and us missing our mark is not really off base when we look at somebody else and how they've missed their mark. And when somebody misses their mark by an inch, and you have somebody who has missed the whole mark. I shot a bow yesterday. I'm trying to get into bow hunting. I'm sitting there going, I'm missing a whole month of hunting, you know. And so I'm yesterday just going, and I missed the target. One out of all that, I only missed it once, and I could not find that arrow. But guess what? All the other ones still didn't hit the bullseye. But what happens is we think the one that completely missed the whole target is a lot worse than the one that missed that bullseye. And so when we begin to compare ourselves to other people and their problems and their sins and stuff like that, then man, here's Isaiah though. Isaiah is now comparing himself to pure in holiness. There were 2 wicked brothers, and one of them passed away, and the surviving brother went up to the preacher and said, listen, for $50,000, I need you to do my brother's funeral. And at that funeral, I need you to call him a saint. Now, these 2 brothers just terrorized the whole community. They were horrible. Preacher's like, well, all right, I'll do that. And so the community found out about this exchange that they made, $50,000. You call my brother a saint. How is he going to pull this off? And so he gets up there and he says, so-and-so, he was horrible. said he was unfaithful at his work, he was unfaithful to his spouse, and he kicked the dog, he kicked the cat, he kicked little babies. He just didn't like anybody. You know where I'm going with this. But compared to his what? To his brother, he's a saint. Isaiah did not dare try to compare people around him and say, I am a saint. Because God's holy presence was an awareness of the unholy, filthy that came from his lips. You know, some say that the reason why he says, I'm a wretched man, he talks about his unholy lips, because maybe it was because of that was his specific sin that Isaiah is dealing with. But when we come into the presence of God, our true condition is made apparent by the radiance of the light of holiness. And our response is not worship, but despair. Woe is me, for I am a man of unclean lips. And two things are going to take place when you come into the presence of God. You're either going to run from it. Two things are going to happen. You're either going to come into worship, where God is here with us, and you're going to say, you know what, I don't want to come to worship. I don't want to be in the presence of God. Because if I do that, then it's going to be a contrast to what I really look at like. Here's holiness, and I don't want to see what I really look like. So you're going to run away. Or you're going to have the other one. You're going to come in, and you're going to be like, I know what I need to change. I know what God looks like, and I know where I am. When Isaiah encountered God face to face, he was overwhelmed with God's holiness. And then the third one is this: you become overwhelmed by God's grace. At the moment of Isaiah's confession of guilt, God didn't respond with some type of fiery judgment or throwing some type of stone at him. He literally responded with forgiveness. And there was this beautiful symbolic act where a seraphim touched his lips with a red-hot stone from the altar, and listen to this, pronounced his guilt removed and his debt of sin. It's paid in full. That's why the song Amazing Grace we love so much. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I watched the documentary, and some of you may have watched the same one, the 9/11 documentary on the North Tower, and there were 14 survivors, the only survivors in the North Tower. I believe they were in the stairwell B, I believe it was. And they made it to the 4th floor. They were trying to come down when the building just started to collapse. Bam, 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 bam. And he's describing, there were about 5 or 6 of them that they interviewed, and just describing it just coming down on top of them. And they tuckered. And it began to describe how some of them felt. Some was like, make this quick, don't make this painful. The other one was just like, hey, it's time to go. And then when everything fell on top of them, 14 of them kind of like woke up and realized, you know what, I survived this. But one of them, though, described how everything was dark and all the beams were crossing at each other. One after the other, one after the other, one after the other. And he said it was pitch black. And he talked about that there is no way that we're going to be able to see. There's no way they're going to be able to find us in this rubble. And then he said that when the dust and all that began to, it didn't settle for obviously weeks, but when enough settled, it said that literally he described just a little beam of light just found its way. And that one beam of light let him know which way was north and south and east and west. He knew exactly where he was. And this is one of the first things I thought about, and I know it's weird, I know, is when people go through mess, junk, when there's sin that's just crumbled on top of them, bam, 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 bam. You're sitting there going, there's no way I can get out. There's no way I can see out. And when you think about the presence of God, and you think about what His Son did, and how bright, in our class we talked about that radiant of how bright He is, it doesn't matter what you've gone through. It doesn't matter how big the building is or how big the difficulty is or how big the sin is, that beam of light can come through it. The Son of God can cleanse that sin. He paid that debt. He can cover it. He can forget it. Sometimes it's so hard for us to see that light and find that light when it's literally right there. And so whenever Isaiah saw the presence of God and he was awestruck of who God is, then it realized that, hey, you know what? There is some things that I've got to change, and there's some sin in my life that I got to take care of. But then he also was overwhelmed that a God who created everything that we see and everything that we know offered His Son to bring light into this dark world and take care of the sin that's in my life if I just become obedient to that. If I love His Son, if I contact with Him through the blood of Christ, through His blood, so those sins can be washed away, so that light can shine through my life. And then he was overwhelmed by one last thing as we close this morning. He was overwhelmed by the desire to serve God. The Bible doesn't tell us what happened to Isaiah when he responded to God's call to serve, but other ancient historical records tell us that he was tied between two boards and sawed in two under the orders of a king. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 37. Imagine that for a minute. Tied between two boards and sawn in two because of him making the comment, and I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send and who will go for us? Then I said, here am I, send me. I wonder when Isaiah was on that board, if that is true, on the board being sawn in two, if he's like, man, I wish I didn't get a glimpse of God. You know what? Just let the nation go through what they were going to go through. Why did I enter into the temple? Because when I walked into the temple, I saw God. I don't think he thought like that. Whenever you see God for who God is, and you see yourself for who you are, and you compare yourself to God, and then when you realize how beautiful and how awesome God is, that He's willing to forgive you of your sins, you're overwhelmed by how bad you want to serve Him. Not so that God would love you, but you serve Him because of what God has done for you. We don't serve God to earn His favor. We serve Him because of His favor. And so this morning, how about you? When was the last time you experienced God in the way that Isaiah did, face to face with Him? And that my prayer is this morning that you will be so overwhelmed by God's presence that your life will never, ever, ever be the same. Some of you this morning have spent so much time involved in religious activities that you've lost that awe and wonder of God's holiness. And really all you need to do is just see the Lord God high and lifted up. Others of you have gone too long without acknowledging that your sin is still very much alive and well. And sometimes we just need to cry out, woe is me, for I'm a person of unclean lips. And others of you are painfully in awe of sin and destructive behavior in your life. What you need is an encounter with God's amazing grace. You need to hear Him say, your guilt is taken away and your sin is atoned for. And maybe last year you have grown so cold toward God that you no longer serve Him out of gratitude and love. You may still hold down a position, but you serve out of obligation, guilt, or routine. And what you need to do is encounter with God that will make you cry out, Here I am, Lord, send me. Whatever the condition of your heart is this morning, God is waiting to meet you face to face with Him. Come now while we stand and sing.